Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you, sir. Your predecessor and current OMB director, Mr. Orszag, testified in September 18th, and I'm going to quote him. He said, speaking about energy, decreasing emissions would also impose a cost on the economy. He went on to say that much of those costs will be passed along to the consumers in the form of higher prices for energy and energy-intensive goods. March 17th, Energy Secretary Chu testified before the Science Committee, and he said, quote, the cap-and-trade bill will likely increase the cost of electricity, to the point where he advocated adjusting for trade duties, et cetera. The Secretary also testified, quote, if other countries don't impose a cost on carbon, then we will be at a disadvantage. Do you disagree with any of the statements of those statements by Secretary Chu or by your predecessor, Mr. Orszag?
I think I agree with all of them. CBO has been very clear that a cap-and-trade system or carbon tax would raise the price of carbon emissions, and the cost would ultimately be borne by households. It's also widely understood that if we raise the price of carbon emissions, and our trading partners do not, that creates an additional challenge for our carbon-emitting industries. A number of foreign countries, of course, are imposing caps on their emissions or taxes or establishing cap-and-trade systems or in other ways moving down this path. But I think, it is not controversial that other countries would need to be brought into such a system, or that some sort of adjustments would need to be made at the border as affecting trade, or that some other thing would be done for domestic producers to try to redress the imbalance that.
Right, because otherwise, you agree that it would put us in a disadvantage. So if China and India, as they have stated, don't do it, and we do, that would put us in a disadvantage.
If we just put the price in carbon emissions and don't either get other countries on board or do some adjustments at our border to address that differential or do anything else to help those manufacturers, then they would be at a disadvantage. What I'm trying to suggest here, there are several courses of action that could be taken.
Correct. Absolutely. Now, have you had a chance to, the President has mentioned Spain as one of the countries that the United States needs to look at and follow. As you know, they're number one in green jobs. They went, however, from being a country a few years ago that created more jobs than Germany, France, and Italy combined, to now be the country that has lost more jobs than Germany, Italy, and France combined. There are a number of factors, obviously. It's not just their energy policies, but clearly I think there's a consensus that their energy policy has been a major factor in losing jobs. Have you had an opportunity to study the Spain example? By the way, they're also now having blackouts, which is, I grew up in Spain. It's hard to believe that an industrialized country like that would now have to impose, shut off electricity at certain times of the day to industry. But have you had an opportunity to look at that?
So, Congressman, I don't know much at all. I've now learned a fair bit about the Spanish situation. But I want to emphasize, I'll read a line from testimony I gave on cap and trade a few weeks ago. CBO expects total employment to be only modestly affected by a cap and trade program to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And we go on to explain that except during recessions, of course, most Americans who are interested in working can find a job, and that's a very desirable feature of our labor market and economic system. The biggest effects of cap and trade are felt regionally and in particular sectors, and the transition from current patterns of employment toward the patterns of employment that would prevail if we had a price on carbon that then changed our output and so on. It's the transition that can be costly, particularly to the workers who are most affected. And I think most economists would say that it's not that green jobs are necessarily better or more numerous, but it is the case that the whole nature of trying to limit carbon emissions is trying to change the production structure of the economy, and so some jobs are lost and some jobs are created, and it's the process of helping workers or communities move from one world to the other that's disruptive and that warrants attention of policymakers.
It is important, though, look at Spain as an example. The president himself has mentioned Spain as an example, and Spain now has 18% unemployment, forecasted to go to 20. So I think we need to make sure that we look at that, and I hope you have an opportunity to do so. And Mr. Chairman, I know my time has expired. Thank you, sir.